Hey everyone, I'm excited and honored that Mark Eshleman is joining us today. Now, Mark and I worked together briefly in 2005, and what he has gone on to achieve is impressive. Today, Mark holds a Master's of Arts in Marriage and Family Therapy, and as additional training in emotional focused couples therapy, emotional focused individual therapy, and attachment focused family therapy. Now, Mark has been providing therapy to individuals, couples, and families for the past decade and believes that close and emotional connection relationships can be one of the greatest sources of joy and fulfillment in life. Absolutely. Mark has experience working with a range of issues including couples, marital difficulties, depression and mood instability, anxiety, stress management, traumatic experiences such as childhood abuse and sexual assault, family of origin concerns, and spirituality. In his work with couples, he provides counseling for conflict, relationship dissatisfaction, infidelity, intimacy, trust, and sexual issues. Wow, Mark, I'm just absolutely impressed.
Thank you. That's quite a big introduction.
Yeah, and
it sounds deep, but it just comes back to, the issues and the challenges, the emotional, relational challenges of life that we all face. And so, it's been a privilege to work with couples and families and individuals over the past decade. I've learned a lot.
And the reason why I wanted Mark to join us at this summit was when I lost all my weight. I lost a majority of it fairly quickly. And the therapist I was talking to at the time, they told me a statistic that was quite alarming, which was people that experience significant weight loss quickly, many of them end up, around 85%, end up in either divorce or separation. And that really bothered me, actually, to hear that kind of statistic. However, I remember back in, I think it was mid-'80s, late 80s, we had some friends that went through that, and they ended up divorcing, unfortunately. So I've seen it firsthand. So it really caused me to think a little bit deeper, like, why does that happen? And so one of the things that came to me was, imagine all of a sudden one person in a matter of 12 months drops from, like me, 400 pounds down to 200 pounds. I didn't do that quickly, right? I lost 60 pounds really, really slowly, and then bang, I lost a lot quickly. Your outward body changes, right? So it's not just, people don't know what's going on in my mind. They can actually physically see it. And in some relationships, what happens is, and it happened to me a little bit in terms of, my confidence went up, right? People are coming up to you saying, man, you look great. One lady came up to me and goes, wow, you're amazingly handsome. Nobody ever did that kind of stuff before, right? But here's my wife in the journey with me, hearing all of this. Now, my wife's an amazing support, and we're really solid. But there are relationships where I think the other spouse doesn't appreciate the fact that suddenly they're getting more confidence. People are giving them compliments. They can no longer control them like they used to. It really made me think, okay? And so somebody reached out to us on one of the social media channels, and we hadn't heard or seen or whatever from her for like a long time. Found out that her and her husband had split up. And it had nothing to do with weight, though. But she brought up the word gaslighting. I had never heard of that word before. So what did I do? I went to Google. And so I'm just going to quickly give you the background of what I found, okay?
Where we all go these days.
Yeah, exactly. Dr. Google. No, anyway. So where did it come from? Well, interesting. It came out in 1938 by a play written by Patrick Hamilton called Angel Street. But what made it popular was Alfred Hitchcock created a movie called Gaslight. Now, it was a suspense film. A manipulative husband tries to make his wife think she is losing her mind by making subtle changes in the environment, including slowly and steadily dimming the flame in the gas lamp. Not only does he disrupt her environment and make her believe she's insane, but he also abuses and controls her, cutting her off from family and friends. Consequently, the wife begins to second guess herself, her feelings, her perceptions, her memories. Additionally, she feels neurotic, hypersensitive, and out of control, which is the goal of gaslighting. Isn't that something? I couldn't believe it. And then, of course, it goes on to say that psychologists and counselors began to label this emotional abusive behavior as gaslighting.
Yeah, and I think that's a great definition, Daryl. Like, in general, we kind of, and of course, this term gaslighting's really gained popularity kind of over the past decade, 2 decades, with pop psychology becoming more popular. This is psychology becoming very popular in mainstream culture in North America, and so you're hearing this term. You're seeing lots of articles written by people in the psychology profession, bloggers, videos, and so people trying to navigate what this behavior is. And I think, you touched on 2 important points. In general, gaslighting is making someone question their own reality.
Right.
But I think you touched on the important point that people need to differentiate is, clinically, therapists, we think of it as a form of psychological abuse. And whenever we use the term abuse, abuse kind of denotes something that's repetitive. It's a way of relating or behavior that is repetitive. It's not a one-time thing, but it would be someone in your world consistently or repetitively relating to you this way. That's kind of a general kind of way of defining when we use the word abuse. It's ongoing and continual. And so gaslighting's kind of a form of, for me, it's a form of emotional and mental abuse where, you're causing that person to question their own beliefs, their own perceptions, even their own memories. When that abuse is of a stronger nature, it can get right down to denying facts of events. Pretending that events have been forgotten. So in my world, this is in my world of being a therapist, I tend to see this coming up in intimate relationships. So when I'm working with couples, partners, this behavior sometimes comes into the therapy room and is evident in relationships.
Wow. And it made me think about, how have I actually gaslit my wife? I'm saying that live. That's terrible, but it made me really think and go, okay, because we all can be manipulative in a little way, right? We really, really want something, so we kind of manipulate the facts slightly just so that we can, build up a case why we should buy that or blah blah blah. But is that different?
Yeah, I think when we're thinking of the traditional term of gaslighting, again, we're talking about repetitive behavior. But I like what you're saying in the sense of, when you get down to it, this behavior or action of gaslighting is really about control.
Right.
And you said that earlier. It's kind of about control, whether it's in intimate relationships or parent-child relationships or friendships. And really, you could say for people where we're talking about that more evident gaslighting that's indicative of abusive behavior, you could really say for that person engaging in that behavior, it's about an excessive need for control. But I think as partners in relationships, it's always good to ask ourselves, when I start to change the details or, kind of hide details and I'm kind of engaging in controlling behavior with my spouse, what is that about for me? And and oftentimes, you use that other word manipulation. And often when people are saying someone's manipulating me, what they're really saying is that person is not openly and directly communicating with me, right?
Right.
We're kind of doing a roundabout. When we manipulate someone, we're not communicating openly and directly. We're kind of manipulating. We're doing a roundabout. And so it's always good for us to ask ourselves, if we notice, whoa, I'm doing something controlling. I'm doing something, because we don't develop trust and we don't develop intimacy when we try and control a partner or control a child or control a friend or control a colleague, right? That doesn't create connection that's got a healthy foundation. So, people, when we talk about people engaging in gaslighting, though, that need for control is just more excessive. It's this stronger need for control. And so, gaslighting is indicative ultimately of controlling another person, in a more overt kind of way.
Right.
Yeah.
Because with couples, there's three major things that affect every couple: money, communication, and kids.
Yeah.
So it's a big topic, and it's a big problem, obviously. But are there different levels of gaslighting, or? Yeah, and
I would say yes. So there's kind of different forms of gaslighting. Two of them that I see quite commonly when I work with couples, when a couple comes in and there's, unfortunately, I see couples where there is a bit of an abusive dynamic going on, and that's really difficult, and they're often coming in. And so one of the forms that I often see is where a partner is trivializing or dismissing of the other person. So this occurs kind of when a person engages in belittling behavior, or they disregard the feelings of the other person. They may often that can take the form of accusing them. So there's a lot of accusatory behavior. You're too sensitive. You're overreacting. Again, that's kind of a way of dismissing their behavior. You often see that person engaging in that behavior. They've got an angry reaction. So there's often kind of an angry, maybe even a disgust to their emotional tone, their attitude when they're engaging in that belittling or dismissing behavior. It basically, the dismissing or trivializing is sending the message to the other partner, your feelings aren't valid. Your perception isn't valid. And that doesn't build connection. That doesn't build intimacy. And when it starts to, again, what we're looking for and what people should be looking for in their closest relationships is, am I experiencing that consistently? Do I have a partner or a friend or, like someone in my life where I'm constant, when I express my feelings, when I express my thoughts, when I express my perception, do they make space to validate it, whether they agree or disagree? We can disagree, but it's actually important that we validate those perceptions. And so when we have someone like a partner, it's often a consistent behavior of invalidating. The more dangerous form or behavior of gaslighting that I see is denial. And so that's when a person pretends to forget events, incidents, or even how they occurred. I've had couples come in where, the gaslighting, that form is active, where there's denial, for example, that the sky is blue. They're both looking at the sky, and one person is saying, no, the sky's yellow. And the other person is saying, but I'm sure the sky is blue. And there's this denial even of basic facts or events that have happened in their life or in their relationship. And so I would say when you start to see that type of form of gaslighting, there's a more dangerous dynamic going on in terms of abusive behavior and the consequences that person can be experiencing.
In some of the articles I read, the denying on the gaslighter's side is they actually deny wrongdoing.
Yeah, and so, wow, that's a great comment. That opens up a whole bigger, deeper conversation that, when you start to read the articles, even the scholarly literature, when we're talking about gaslighting as an abusive behavior, and you'll see it in pop psychology, it's often connected to the gaslighter is often struggling with some type of personality disorder, or, you hear this term narcissism. I, I, I don't like putting that label on everybody. I'm very cautious about labels. So often I'll refer to it as narcissistic ways of relating. And it's very common that a gaslighter personally struggles with taking responsibility for their own behavior. Right? That's often why the dynamic is hard to address and hard to change or find healing in when it happens in intimate partner relationships, because the gaslighter has a hard time taking responsibility for their own behavior and looking at themselves.
Right.
Like holding a mirror up to themselves and taking responsibility, but reflecting on their own behavior, their own thoughts, their own feelings. And so you said earlier, I think about how I've gaslighted my wife. Well, just stopping and doing that reflective exercise is often something that people who are engaging in gaslighting behavior that's of a stronger nature, of an abusive behavior, they struggle intrinsically to do. They don't reflect. And there's a lot of reasons for why that occurs. Sometimes it's because people have serious trauma histories. And so their reflective capacity is limited. They haven't had close relationships where they've developed that capacity or that skill.
Right.
Yeah.
Because I've heard, example, we love our family, of course, right? And a lot of times people who stay in those relationships, they love their husband or their wife, whoever's gaslighting them. And they'll say something like this: well, they're not like that all the time. But what's interesting is they're like that in public, but maybe they're not like that at home.
Yeah, so that's actually one of the signs, can be one of the signs or symptoms to look for. Like when someone's trying to look for, we could call them red flags or signs, constantly defending the abusive person's behavior or making rationalizations or excuses for it. So that's often a common one. When I see clients come into the therapy office and engage in counseling around it, that's often a common rationalization or a common comment I hear is like, well, it was even hard to notice because it doesn't happen all the time.
Right.
Or they weren't like that all the time. There was moments when they were very loving or affectionate, or it felt different.
Yeah.
So, and that's, there's truth to that somewhat for people, right? Like oftentimes abusive behavior, even though it's consistent, it's not 100% of the time. And so there is some truth to that reality for people of it can be hard to notice and pick up because it's not 100% of the time.
So is there hope for gaslighters?
Absolutely. Yeah. I tend to start from the assumption of there's hope for everybody.
Right. I do too.
Yeah. Yeah. I do believe there's hope. Often, that kind of touches into how do people change. And, we all come to change for different reasons, but it's very common for people to become motivated to change when they're in a place of pain or brokenness.
Right.
And so
and broken people break people, hurt people.
Yeah, and actually brokenness, in our culture, we tend to want to avoid pain. We tend to want to avoid being in a broken place. And being in a season where we're going through pain or some brokenness in our own lives and journeys is actually can be helpful, can be healthy. We, in Western culture, we tend to view pain negatively. It's a negative feeling. We don't want to sit in it. We don't want to go there. And of course, we don't want to live there.
Yeah.
But coming to a place of brokenness can be very motivating. It can be very helpful to create change, transformation, healing. And so for people engaging in gaslighting behavior, it's often when there's loss in their life or that other partner starts to put boundaries in, and they start to change the pattern of relating. And so they go, listen, I'm not gonna, when you talk to me this way, I'm not gonna accept that. I'm not gonna allow that. And so often the people experiencing the abusive behavior, it's when they start to put in boundaries, when they start to make change, it kind of, in an indirect way, kind of causes the gaslighter to have to look at themselves or face themselves in a new way, which can be motivating for change. And so often, I've had that kind of experience in my own practice myself. Sometimes I get people who are engaging in gaslighting or that type of behavior where they're coming in because they don't want to lose their marriage, or they don't
Yeah.
want to lose that relationship,
Yeah.
or they don't want to lose the relationship with their child. Adolescents or young adults starting to put in boundaries and expecting to relate in a healthier way. And so those people get motivated. I don't want to lose that relationship.
Yeah, totally. Because when people experience separation or divorce, there's a lot to it. People don't even think about the financial ramifications sometimes either, right? So I think people feel like, I have to make this work because all these other things need to work. Even if I have to walk in eggshells with my spouse for the next 10, 15 years, they're willing to literally sacrifice themselves for their kids and those other things, right?
Yeah.
I like to think that there's hope as well. But I think, people that are attending this summit, they're here because they want to see transformation in themselves. But not everyone's willing to go on that journey with us. So we have to make that conscious decision. So anyone that's experiencing some level of manipulation, right, or gaslighting, as it were, their spouses might not be ready, but they are. What does that look like?
Great question. And so that's kind of the other side of the coin. Two thoughts I'm having. What does that look like when they're ready? When they're ready to address that dynamic in the relationship, I think it goes back to starting to have boundaries. Mm-hmm. Those can be practical boundaries. Like you said, if they're feeling controlled on a practical way, like around money, the schedule of their life, like that partner who gaslights tends to control what our routine looks like, how money's done, how we do life day to day or week to week with our family. It can be practical boundaries, but often it starts with emotional boundaries. And, oftentimes that's where a lot of my work with those partners happens, is just first even coming to acknowledge this is an unhealthy dynamic, or in more severe cases, this is an abusive dynamic. And that can be part of the first step of, I'm ready to have change or transformation, and then working with those people of having boundaries. And so people might be wondering, well, what's an emotional boundary? And it's very common for people who are experiencing gaslighting consistently to feel isolated from friends and family, but then emotionally inside doubt themselves and go to a place where they feel worthless or depressed. Those are all, again, signs too of being gaslighting, that especially doubting themselves, feeling worthless. There's something wrong with me, because they're questioning themselves, right? They're doubting themselves.
They actually they question their own judgment.
Yeah. And so then recognizing what behavior is going on between me and my partner or that other person that is shaping that feeling, and then being able to step in those moments, being able to step in those interactions and have a voice and go, wait a minute, the way you just said that doesn't sit well with me. Or wait a minute, I'm not going to talk to you when you're talking to me that way. That doesn't sit right. That doesn't feel right for me.
Right.
And being able to start to put in small emotional boundaries to change the dynamic, the way that we're relating. Yeah. A big part of that transformation is the process of how we're relating. And that's the whole purpose of boundaries. Remember, boundaries, I'm going to take a minute here and define my definition of boundaries. Boundaries aren't about keeping people out. Boundaries are about protecting my goals, my priorities, and my heart. And actually, boundaries are amazing because they cause people to relate to us on a higher level. And so when we have goals for ourselves, when we have, a lot of people want to go through a transformation journey, whether that's our physical health, our body, our well-being, boundaries help us protect those goals. They help us protect our priorities. So you even think about people who are working out. What do? They often put boundaries in about their time. They go, I'm going to get up at 6 a.m. and work out every day, right? They create these goals. Well, what is that? That's a boundary. I'm going to go to bed at 9 p.m. so I can get up at 6 a.m. and work out every day. And they prioritize that. That's a priority in that transformation journey. And we build in boundaries around our schedules to make sure we're prioritizing what we're prioritizing. And so boundaries protect our heart, our goals, our priorities. And we don't want to just give our heart to anybody. Like, often we give our hearts to people that we're in closest relationships to. And so healthy relationships have boundaries. That's one of the signs and criteria. And so again, boundaries, taking those steps to have emotional boundaries, practical boundaries. If we have friends or neighbors or colleagues who are engaging in this type of behavior, having boundaries where, okay, I'm not going to spend my free time around you, or I'm going to distance myself and limit how much contact I have with that person. Maybe it's an extended family member.
Right.
And being intentional to go, it's sad. It's sad that it comes to kind of that place that you have to put in that boundary. And often when people put in those boundaries, I encourage them to process the emotional impact on themselves of having to do that.
Yeah.
But again, taking those steps. The second thing I wanted to touch on is part of what is the step of this transformation journey. I want to come right back to the beginning of our conversation. You mentioned you and your wife. And we're talking about one side of the coin, this gaslighting behavior in close relationships. The other side of the coin, one of the healthy things we should be looking for that's there, or we should be trying to get to in our close relationships, is what's called emotional engagement. And Daryl, you mentioned 3 things that happen in every intimate or romantic relationship. I want to add a 4th, and what we know from studies is it's actually the most important factor in intimate, close relationships is emotional engagement. How do we as partners talk on a vulnerable level and talk about our vulnerable feelings and be engaged on that level?
Right.
And what we know today from studies, couple studies of marriages, the number one factor that leads to marital satisfaction and the highest outcomes in intimate relationships is emotional engagement happening. And so if we go right back to your example in the beginning with your wife and you losing all this weight, and now all of a sudden people in the world are relating differently to you. They're complimenting you. They're engaging you and talking about you in a different way. Emotional engagement looks like, are me and my wife processing that? Like me turning to my wife and going, people are giving me compliments and praising me and making comments about my body. How are you feeling about this? How are you taking that?
Yeah.
And so that's, as people are going through these transformation journeys, often around weight loss, body image, the changes, and when they're reaching their goals, a big thing that can be helpful for married couples or couples in that journey is processing things in a more vulnerable way, that journey with their partners. How is the partner taking it?
Right.
How are they feeling about the changes? Because, I think you would notice when you went through your weight loss journey, that's not just a change in your body image and the weight loss. It's a change in lifestyle. It's a change in routine.
Yeah.
And your partners are on that journey. They're along for the ride. And so then there's all kinds of important conversations that need to have of how are they feeling about the lifestyle change?
Yeah.
Are they even on the lifestyle change with you? Like, I think that's part of what leads to divorce for a lot of couples when there's body transformation is they go through a lifestyle change. They go through a change in thinking and being.
Yeah.
But is my partner on board with that? Are we in the journey together? And are we having the conversations around that?
I love that because I think it's important to have that conversation before you lose all your weight.
Yeah.
Because my wife and I, when we heard that statistic, I was still probably 390 pounds or something like that. We talked about that, we talked about how we had seen other couples in the past that didn't make it because of that. And so I think maybe we're 40 years this July. That's how long we'll be married. And so, we're a statistic, I guess, in that respect. So we're a pretty solid couple, but talking about that right from when I was big and through that whole journey is probably was great that we did that rather than wait until I manifested now at 200 and then I've got all this stuff that's happening and I've never shared, never talked about it. She has no idea what's going on in here and it just could blow up.
And that's the key right there. What you said, she doesn't know what's going on in here. How do we have more vulnerable conversation?
Yeah.
And in general, that's a lot of my work with couples. Some couples they struggle to get to that place of more vulnerable conversation. Like, how do we, even in our weight loss journey, how do we talk about our fears, our desires, what we're hoping to get out of this? And, for partners too, that can bring up fears, that can bring up these feelings of like, well, how is this going to change our relationship? How is this going to change things between us?
Yeah.
And it's so important for partners to sit down and talk about, how do we hold on to ourselves through this journey, right? Like, and we don't even think that way sometimes, because weight loss, it's a journey of success. And sometimes we think about, when we go through failures, how do we hold on to each other? We think about the partners or the couple that they own a business and they go through bankruptcy.
Right.
How do we hold on to our marriage through the stress and the failure of that? But oftentimes we need to have those more intimate, vulnerable conversations as we get more successful, like managing success. And so, for many people going through weight loss journey, it feels good. It feels positive. It feels like a success.
Yeah.
I'm getting to a place that I'm relating to myself physically, mentally, in a healthier, more positive way. That's how most people experience themselves as they go through that journey. And so, how as a couple to sit down and literally have a conversation of, how do we maintain closeness, or how do we hold on to each other? Or for some couples, it's the first time they talk about, are we close? Like, do we actually have good connection?
Yeah.
And those are, I'll tell you, Daryl, they're really hard conversations to start if you've never done it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think we just assume that we just all know how to have those conversations and start those conversations. And
right.
And it can be hard. Like, I would want people to know, if they're listening to this and feeling, well, like, I don't know how to have those conversations with my spouse. I don't even think we've ever had them. To turn towards them and start those conversations is a really big step. It's, I would say you're being really courageous by even thinking about it, and then trying to, like, sit down and go, hey, can we talk for 5 minutes about my journey or us?
Mm-hmm.
That's a great first step, and people are being courageous and brave to do it.
Yeah. And it's not just about weight loss. Transformation, what we're talking about, and couples whose marriages, whether they're married or whether they're living together, doesn't matter. There's other things that factor into it as well. Because, like example, self-help. One spouse is just really focused on, diving into all John Maxwell stuff and, all these great people out there. And all of a sudden they're having this change of mindset, but their spouse isn't even interested in that journey. So things are happening. They don't see it either.
Yeah.
And
it's like, it's so key that we let our spouses in on that journey.
Right.
I love what you just said, because this actually came up for me this morning.
Okay.
Even as I was getting ready this morning, me and my wife, during the pandemic, I keep hearing a lot of talk of, like, it being a season of rest, or kind of everything slowed down, especially in 2020. And people talking about, it's a time to rejuvenate or rest, and that being a season. And that actually didn't resonate with me. The past 2 years have kind of been, for me personally, a season of delay. Actually, we started, our counseling practice bought a new office in a new building.
Yeah.
And so it's actually, building a new office in a new building has been quite the journey. Designing it, getting the construction, everything that goes into that. But it's been such a season of delay with that process. And so many areas of my life just kind of feeling like we're in delay, or we're just kind of treading water. And I recently have been reading a book, and it kind of talked about that. And I wasn't thinking, I'm kind of, this past couple of years, we don't think that way. We don't, and so this book brought it up. Sometimes we can be in seasons of delay, and it really resonated with me. And so I had this conversation with my wife this morning. I kind of did what we're talking about. Was I said to her, hey, as we're talking about our journey in 2022 and goals, because me and my wife do that.
Yeah.
I said, I've been reading a chapter in a book that's really resonated with me. And as we have more conversations about our future and goals and where we're going as a family, I really would like you to read this chapter first.
Right.
And so this whole conversation to bring her into what's resonating in my heart and mind, and making sure I do that, because as I express thoughts and how this is impacting me and what it means to me, I want her to have that foundation of what is my process.
Right. Wow.
And that's so important in our closest relationships, that we do that with our partners.
That's awesome.
That's connection, Daryl, isn't it? Like that's just being connected.
Yeah, it is. But we'll go back to gaslighting for a moment here, because we could talk a lot about so much amazing stuff. There are people out there who would just love to have that type of a relationship, that type of connection, like you have with your wife, like I have with my wife. And I love how you brought up boundaries, because that's a good place to start. Because if you start sharing some of these things to someone that's an extreme gaslighter, you know what's going to happen. They're going to devalue it.
It's going to be turned on you and used against you or dismissed.
Exactly.
And so, yeah, we don't want to encourage couples who are in that dynamic, that severe kind of dynamic, to be more emotionally vulnerable. That's often not the first step.
Right.
Boundaries are the first. Boundaries and starting to have a voice for myself are the first step. And I just want to encourage people. Sometimes people need help with that. I don't want people to be sitting at home and go, "Oh, great, I'm alone to do that."
Yeah.
Some people do need help with that, whether that be a life coach or a counselor or even friends and family, to have those conversations. Whoever you turn to for support and lean into for support, being able to start processing, how do I have boundaries? How do I have a voice? How do I take my first step around maybe this one type of behavior that's happening in our relationship?
Right. That's good. You start by transformation in yourself first, create those boundaries, and then eventually people start to see it, right? Mm-hmm. And it doesn't make sense trying to change your spouse. It's probably never going to happen, right?
No, you can't change them. But like you said, actually, this whole conversation of boundaries is actually less about my partner and more about how I relate to myself.
Right. Very good.
You nailed it there, Daryl. Yeah. That's totally what it is. It's how do I relate to myself? How do I allow myself to be treated and related to?
Yeah.
We could frame this even in the framework of boundaries are also about loving myself well.
Right. Wow, this is a whole journey in itself.
Completely, absolutely. Like aren't we all on that journey?
We are.
Of learning how to love ourselves well, love well in our closest relationships.
Now I do have kind of a last question before we go, because I know we could talk about this on and on and on. This is a tough question. When do you know it's time to say, enough's enough? I need to walk away from this relationship.
Good question.
I don't expect you to answer that, but I'd like you to speak into it.
No, I think that goes back to some of the signs or symptoms. Like if there's more of a, obviously we don't want to encourage anybody to stay in an abusive relationship without addressing that abuse.
Mm-hmm.
And again, let's go right back to the beginning. Clinically, gaslighting is a form of psychological abuse.
Right.
Typically emotional abuse. The hard thing for people with emotional abuse is kind of invisible. Like when we talk about physical abuse or domestic violence, it's often there's a bruise. Other people can see it. I can see it. Like it's often a more clear sign of like, okay, more drastic steps and boundaries need to be taken. And sometimes people step in for us. And so emotional abuse sometimes is more difficult to navigate for the partner experiencing that or the partner being injured by that.
Right.
I would say there's some signs that people want to pay attention to. The number one sign that I see in intimate relationships is partners being isolated from friends and family.
Right.
Is your intimate relationship coming between you and your family? Your mom and dad, your siblings, even your kids. Mm-hmm. Are you isolated from friends and family? That's a clear sign that something needs to change. That isolation is what often leads to feeling down, depressed, even anxious. Right? Again, there's another sign is when you're consistently feeling like you're walking on eggshells around that other person. Our closest relationships, we should feel safe and secure.
Yeah,
those are the two main foundational pillars of a secure, intimate relationship is, do I have this sense of safety?
Mm-hmm.
And we feel safety in our bodies. We feel it psychologically. We kind of know it mentally as adults. The other thing that I'm looking for is, do I start to lie to friends and family, to avoid having to make excuses for my partner? Yeah. This is kind of a form, to me, this is a form of hiding ourselves. Like when we start to hide ourselves, we start to lie to our friends and family. Now we're starting to not live in reality, right? Like we're not only, gaslighting is having that person make us question our own reality, but when we cross that line, we're now all of a sudden, we're hiding ourselves and we're not living in reality of the facts of life.
Right.
That's again another sign of when I would know, okay, it's time to start to put in drastic boundaries or more serious boundaries, or even start to look at, how do I distance myself or take a break from this relationship?
Yeah. I like how you said distance or take a break, because earlier you had mentioned about, if it's like a parent or somebody else that it doesn't live with you, you can choose to distance yourself in terms of, okay, I'm only going to see them once a month, or rather than every day.
Yeah.
You can choose to do that. But when you're living with somebody 24/7, that's really hard to do, right? So
yeah, and
what does that look like
if
you're going to do that?
Instituting boundaries too. The whole part of boundaries we haven't talked about is, like, when you institute boundaries, you also have to have a consequence.
Right.
Like, oftentimes those partners, especially when there's more control going on or behavior that's indicative of an excessive need for control from the partner, if you don't have a consequence and you're not ready to follow through on that consequence, they're going to call your bluff.
Right. Yeah.
Like, they'll test whether or not there's going to be a consequence to their behavior. A big part of boundaries is, I voice a boundary, but then I also have to voice, if this continues, I'm just not going to talk with you, or I'm going to walk away, or I'm going to end the conversation. And you have to be ready and willing to do that.
Right.
That's a big part of establishing boundaries. And so, yeah, that's a whole nother part of establishing boundaries in our relationships.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's a healthy part of doing life, right? Yeah. We all have boundaries. Mm-hmm. Right? We all don't give our personal time, our internal world, to everybody. We don't give it to, the person we run across in the grocery store. We don't open up and share our dreams, our desires, our secrets. That's a boundary. Yeah. And so...
True.
Yeah.
Well, listen, I think we're at the end of our time here, Mark. It's been amazing. Now, one thing that I love about... I'm trying to see the silver lining about the pandemic, okay? And so it's not that I love it, but I think what's really cool is people can get help without actually sitting down physically with someone like you in an office, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're locked at home and you feel isolated, you can jump on a Zoom call or whatever your therapist or your counselor is using, or coach, and do it in the privacy of your bedroom or wherever, where you're not physically leaving the house and, bringing up these red flags to your spouse. What are you doing, right? I think that's a silver lining in the fact that we're doing a lot more of this video conferencing.
Yeah, and I mean, so many aspects of our world have become virtual, right? We're doing our business meetings, we're doing our life coaching. And for us therapists, yes, we're meeting with a lot of clients who they're in physical locations where they're isolated, or they just practically can't make it to the office. And so it provides this beautiful option for people to receive support and reach out.
Right. Yeah. This has been a great conversation, Mark. How can people get in touch with you? What's the best way?
Yeah, the best way is to jump on our website, pacificcoastcounseling.ca, 2 L's in counseling and .ca. They can Google Pacific Coast Counseling. Our main office, our office is in Langley, but we do provide virtual counseling. Yeah. And they can go on our website, check out, there's a description of our services. There's even a team page that gives a bio for myself and the other counselors on my team. And then if people want to get more information, they can call our office. We have a receptionist who'd be happy to speak with them and talk further. Yeah. And just if people are needing counseling or therapeutic support, our reception would be happy to connect with them and walk them through that process. We actually have a confidential online intake form that they can fill out and complete. And yeah, so all the information about how to connect is on our website, pacificcoastcounseling.ca.
And they don't have to be Canadian, right? They can connect with whether they're from the US or from the UK or New Zealand. I mean, other than time zone problems, but it's available to anyone.
Yeah, and I meet with people from different time zones, and we work it out, we figure it out. It's it's again another perk of the virtual counseling.
Awesome, Mark. Hey, I vouch for Mark. Mark is an amazing man, has an amazing family. Connect with him if you can. We will put his website link in the chat area. It'll also be in the All Access Pass area. So until next time, Mark, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for watching.
Yeah, thanks, Darryl. This conversation has been great.